This is the DRF Players Podcast. Here are your hosts, Peter Thomas Fornatel and Jonathan Kinchin.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Players Podcast. This is 367, September 18th, 2018 edition, a significant date in my life as it is my 14th wedding anniversary. Happy anniversary to my beautiful wife, Susan Van Meter. I, of course, am Peter Thomas Fornatal. Happy to be back with you, ensconced in the Brooklyn bunker once again after a super fun weekend in Toronto. Thanks so much to Woodbine for putting on a great event up there, not just the racing for Woodbine Mile Day, but also the contest with a record crowd and pretty interesting result that maybe we'll get to talking about a little bit later. Over the course of the next hour, we're going to have a couple of guests, no mystery guests this time, but a couple of guests we'll be bringing in sequentially later in the show. We'll have Scott Carson to talk about some of the racing itself that happened over the course of Woodbine Mile weekend and also the tournament in which he participated. I'll introduce the first guest in a minute, but first, let's bring in the co-host. You know him, you love him, the master of the mute button, the people's champion, Jonathan Kinchin. JK, we missed you up there in TO.
You were on the upper border. I was on the lower border. We both crossed over. We couldn't get that Wi-Fi to connect with our neighbors to the north and the south, with Toronto and Mexican Wi-Fi mixed together. It wasn't going to happen last Friday. So we did try. We sat around and we tried using hotspots and random tricks, and it wasn't going to go well.
I was actually still in the Brooklyn bunker. I delayed my travel to be in a solid place for the show, something I'm going to try to do more and more of as we try to end the era of dodgy hotel Wi-Fi. But indeed, it was the dodgy Mexican Wi-Fi that bit us in the behind. We apologize to folks, though I have to say I probably just would have spent half the show talking about how Mectal was going to win, and then you all could have suffered the same excruciating beat that I did. We'll get to that a little bit later in the show. First, I want to bring in our first guest. Lots of credits. I'm sure you know him if you are someone who follows horse racing at all through any form of social media, because he's written for America's Best Racing for the last 5 years. He also is the poobah of the site DanonymousRacing.com. He's also the co-founder of Equestricon, and that's mainly what we're going to be talking to him about today, as tickets are now on sale for that event that this podcast is going to be very involved in. Breeders' Cup week. Let's bring in Dan Tordjman to the podcast. Dan, welcome back. How are you, my friend?
Good, man. It's good to be back. It was good to actually see you in the flesh this past weekend up at Woodbine. It was an awesome time. I've got a Northern Dancer story as well with Mectal and Johnny Bear and all the rest of it. I have a little bit of a sob story as well, though I did actually hit. Not as much as I should have, of course. We never do.
You're not allowed to complain about those type of beats on the show, but we'll make a special exception for you. If Kinchin tried it, I'd put him in the penalty box for 15 minutes. You, Dan, we'll get to that eventually. First off, tell us what you were doing up there at Woodbine. What were your was it more of a personal trip or a business trip, and how was your experience for the weekend?
Yeah, I'd been up there a couple of times, fortunate enough to make the trip up. I think I think pretty much hands down the most beautiful turf course in North America, and generally some really good betting. I was up pretty much within my capacity as a correspondent for America's Best Racing. So what I do is you do a little bit of handicapping, post picks, share picks, insights, and that sort of thing. And then when I'm on the grounds there, I do social media, so I'll capture videos. Did an interview with, for example, on Sunday, with Javier Castellano after he won the Summer Stakes, post that to social. So it's all about kind of taking the fans inside the game, behind the scenes, try to cover it in sort of a different way, a more casual way, because America's Best Racing is primarily geared toward introducing fans to the sport and giving them sort of a deeper knowledge, of how to bet it, how to understand it. And so those are just some of the things I did this past weekend. It was a lot of fun.
Talk about the introduction. I used Dan the other day. It was a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago. I had a layover in Dallas, and I ran to Lone Star Park with my dad and a couple of his friends, and I was only there for 2 or 3 races, and I was obviously trying to get down as much as I could in that small little time frame. Well, my dad's friend was asking me a bunch of questions, and I was walking up to the window with me, and I look up, and there's Dan's mug up on the screen explaining racing. And I said, Dan's my friend. Just watch him. He'll tell you. And then I went ahead and bet.
That's a great point, actually. And this is something I've been meaning to talk about on the podcast for a while, about when we take guests and the different kinds. It's sort of formulating in my head, maybe as an article to write somewhere down the line, maybe as a freelance correspondent for America's Best Racing. But the idea is how to manage it when you have guests, when you have people who don't know, because there's so many different types. The 2 groups that leap to mind who will be featured in this article eventually, there's the what's a furlong crowd. Those people who will just pepper you with question after question. I had some great folks, but I had a particularly good group of what's a furlong guests who had me everything from literally what's a furlong to explaining the claiming system as we're trying to dope out these races. And then you've got sort of the other extreme of novice, the what are we doing here crowd, we'll call them, who want to be taken along for the ride at every betting opportunity. It's great to have guests. You've got to be smart about how you do it. Dan, you're obviously a sharp guy. You enjoy the betting side of the equation. How do you balance the need, when you're at the track, the need to inform new players with trying to keep sane at the same time?
Well, I think I try to come as prepared as possible, like all of us do. Obviously, I try to come prepared with some of my plays or my projected plays and kind of see how the day unfolds. And then, it is sort of a balance in general because, the track is such a social place. Even if I'm not explaining to people, how much their 3 or 4 horse exacta box is going to cost, I'm going to be having a conversation with someone else about, what they've been up to since the last time I saw them. That's just the kind of place the racetrack is. So I try to plan ahead for, those kinds of conversations, which are great. I mean, that's what makes the track so special. But then I also, the good thing about America's Best Racing is that there's really this database there with educational content that I could pull up a page and say, hey, here's, like JK just mentioned, the videos that we put together explaining everything from, placing a win bet to understanding, sort of the mindset behind putting together a multi-race wager. And, we have all sorts of videos like that and written content up on americasbestracing.net. So I could just, pull up a video or a blog post or whatever it might be and say, hey, read this. This will kind of get you to where you want to be. So that's one way that I can sort of not necessarily put people off, but I could say, hey, this will explain it better than I can in the next 30 seconds.
Exactly. And that's something that I'm going to be leaning on more and more when I'm in those situations, because that's it. You don't want to just give the quick answer that comes to mind a lot of times. You want something thoughtful. It's typically a lot easier to be thoughtful in a pre-recorded video or written piece than it is to just be off the cuff. And I think it's something that we all should be leaning on more when we bring folks to the track. Did you have a follow-up on that, JK?
Yeah, the truth is that at some point someone took the time to answer our questions. And so I will always want to make sure that I try my hardest to do so. One of the things I'm very fortunate about, when I go to the racetrack, I'm typically with a larger group than just me. And so I don't have to field all the questions. Pete can answer a few, Duke can answer a few, Jason Avila can answer a few, Pipes can answer a few, Jake can answer a few. And that way I'm not like, it's not always me answering the question. And plus, it's also good to get those different perspectives. I think for a newbie to realize that, like, these are the different ways I can be a horse player.
I want to hear Pipes answer what's a furlong. I'm predicting the response may have 4 letters in it, but I do take your point. And to bring it back to today's date and it being my 14th anniversary today, one of the best I've ever seen at fielding newbie questions and having the knowledge to sort of set people straight and enjoy doing it is Susan Van Meter, my wife. A fabulous help when we get in those situations. The day that I was referencing earlier, I happened to be solo, and Dan, to your point, I happened to be a little bit behind with my work, so I was trying to still construct a ticket for the pick 4 while dealing with it, which gets tricky. I think that's a great point, to be smart when you know you're going to have your newbie guests. And honestly, maybe this is going to sound highfalutin or crazy, but I feel like if you're a horse player who's found this show, you're probably somebody for whom it's maybe not all the time, but at least once in a while, a little bit of a pay-it-forward obligation in the way JK was talking about to enfranchise new players. Something you can do. Players ask all the time, what can we do to help the sport? Well, yes, betting money, but also the fan side. I think we have a little bit of a responsibility almost to try to at least explain and bring folks into this game if we want to see it continue to not only survive but really thrive. And Dan, that's something that really interests me about your work, you guys being at the intersection of fandom and gambling. Gambling is absolutely one of the things that's prevalent on the site, as you've pointed out. And I think sometimes a lot of hardcore gambler types, for some strange reason, seem to have a little bit of I'm just going to call it a chip on their shoulder when it comes to the fan side of things and bringing in new fans. What advice do you have about bridging that gap and being involved, having a foot in both of those worlds at once, the fan side and the gambler side? Surely they're both really important.
Yeah, this is sort of a hot button issue for me in particular, because just this past weekend, I try as possible, especially which is sometimes. So, sometimes you get sucked in, but again, try to, as much as possible, make the case that, I think about the Pearl Jam song, "This Is Not For You." You remember that? This is not for you, okay? So it's fine if everything that's created in racing is not for you. Some of it will be for you, but this, in particular, is not for you, and that's okay. Like any other business, you have various types of customers, and, with sort of the current makeup of our business and our industry, it's clear that we need to bring in new customers. So yes, do existing customers and do horse players get the shaft sometime? Absolutely. Is it that way all the time, or our horse players kind of looking for the shaft sometimes? Yes. And so I think a lot of it is sort of this projected, there's this big conspiracy that, the industry is, really doesn't care about us at all, and everything they're doing is about hats and petting ponies and all the rest of that. And it's not the case. I mean, I am sort of on the inside of it, but I'm a guy who grew up in Brooklyn. My first experience with racing was going to the OTB with my dad. Still, my favorite thing to do is just to meet up with my dad and fire away at 20 different racetracks on a Sunday afternoon while we're drinking beers. So I think that is probably the prototype of the person who is typically upset that fan development has kind of reached the level that it's reached. But all you can do is say, look, I love this game now, and I love it forever, and I want my kids, when I have some, God willing, to enjoy the game as well. And I want it to be around for them and for future generations. So it's not just about me firing left and right while drinking beers. I feel like I have a little bit of an obligation, now that I'm in position to do something about it, to develop that next generation of racing fan and horse bettor.
JK, I want to get your take on this, because you, more than anybody I know, I feel like, connect the fan side and the gambler side. I mean, seeing how giddy we both were, meeting American Pharoah, for example. But before I get your take on this intersection, I just want to point out that these fan exercises and this idea of what Dan said exactly, getting the next generation, these are where the sport's annuities are going to come from. And basically what I mean by that is, when it is true that the money comes largely from gambling, but when you think of the pro players we know, JK, Duke Matisse, Paul Matisse, Sean Borman, Mike Maloney, these guys eventually get to the point where they're annuities for the sport. They bet so much money throughout the course of the year that racing is making every year off these guys this significant amount of money. But then the question you have to ask yourself is, where do they come from? How do they get started? And honestly, if somebody wants to go to the track to attend a fair or get their kids get their face painted or wear a fancy hat or drink a cool cocktail, and they're going to bring friends, and some kid is going to go and have a positive memory of that day because of the way it's marketed to non-gamblers, to me, that's where I see the next Sean Borman coming from. Yes, in a lot of cases, it's going to be through a direct relation, an uncle, an aunt, whomever who brings somebody to the races. But I love these fan outreach efforts because I see them actually quite connected to the gambling world. Your thoughts, JK?
Absolutely. I think that 95% of the serious players that I can think of in my brain started as fans. They have these really rich stories of like their first interactions at the racetrack. Duke and Paul will tell the story of like some 1970s grade 1 at Saratoga. I don't remember which one it is, but if you watch the video, you see a young Duke and Paul running through the infield like while the horses are running. It's a real thing. And so, I think that the idea that, I can think of maybe one player in particular, and it's actually a player that I wanted to kind of give some claps to anyways for a performance this weekend. Another great performance is Tony Zhou. Like, I don't think Tony started off as a fan. I think my impression, in the conversation we had, is that he saw an opportunity from a financial and numbers standpoint, and then was obviously attracted to the game after that. But I don't think he had he's never told me a childhood story. I could be completely wrong about that. He's never told me
You're half right. I mean, I do think that the gambling got the hook in him quick, but the story he tells is about going to the Belmont, maybe Palace Malice year. I can't remember, but in recent memory. But it was definitely for him the combination of, okay, there's this great sport and there's this gambling element. But even somebody as savvy and as, numbers oriented as him did connect to the fan side of it at the same time, and will describe whoever that Belmont winner was. Maybe it was Union Rags. I think it might have been Union Rags as like his favorite horse. And it's not all numbers, even to a quant like Tony.
Which is even more. Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think what you're both hitting on here is that there are so many entry points to the game, whether it's on the betting side or the ownership side or just the fan side. There are so many different entry points. So why not keep all those doors open? And let's try to find ways to bring people through those doors. And so I think that's my general approach, at least when I'm looking at fan development and cultivating that next generation of fan and horse bettor, is let's keep all these doors open. Maybe it's a horse, maybe it's a race, but maybe it is that sort of, the math side of it and the number side of it that hooks you. So let's also create content and opportunities for people to get involved that way. And I think that's where, in a lot of ways, Equestricon, I think, is sort of the next phase in my mind of kind of what we do to engage with people who have a little bit of a taste and kind of want to, dive deeper. And so we kind of try to create content that appeals to all those potential, various interests. So, yeah.
JK, button up your story about when we got on the tangent about Tony, and then we're going to come back then. I'm glad, obviously, we're here to talk about Equestricon. At some point, we probably should. So kudos to you for looping that back in. But finish your thought from before, JK.
Just, sometimes racing reminds me of music and food, where we all have experienced this, Pete, you being a food guy, where you find this delicious food place or you hear this awesome record. But then once everyone starts going to the food place and the record starts getting played on the radio, it somehow loses a little bit for you. I try not to be that way, but there's a lot of people in the world that are like that. We can't do that in racing, where you discovered this great sport, but then once someone comes to the sport for other reasons outside of the reason that you did, you can't be upset at them or be annoyed at them. And I see that so often where, these, like you said, these kind of people stick their nose up to the fashion pieces that we see on NBC or that ABR does. Like, it's not relevant, but it is. You're bringing people to this game, and then once they're here, we'll hook them. Once they're here, we'll hook them, and then they'll be able to really enjoy the other aspects of the game that will carry on. And like you said, will be annuities as the years go on.
Right, and maybe it won't be them, but somebody they bring. That's my point. Let's make this tent as big as possible. And one great way for folks to continue their journey in racing, and we have so many people. One of our frequently asked questions: I want to get involved in racing. What can I do? And one of my now go-to answer is to mention Equestricon, as we've talked about many times. Networking. And this is even true on the gambling side, but certainly on the business side, networking as important of a skill that you can have in this life, I truly believe, but especially when you're talking about a career in a sport like horse racing, or even just becoming a better. I feel like the more people you meet, the more connections you have, the better your journey is going to go. For me, that's one of the chief benefits of an event like Equestricon. But of course, it's so much more than that, and there's so much specific information you're going to learn from the panels and activities at Equestricon. And the reason we wanted to have you on today, Dan, was to give an overview of the event so folks know what it's all about, and then we'll talk specifically about how they can get their tickets and come join us in a few weeks' time in Louisville.
Yeah, and it, I am, first of all, thank you for, kind of having Equestricon come up as something that you would refer people to, because truly, this is a project that's it's all heart and soul. And again, it comes from the perspective that we just talked about of somebody who was an outsider to racing, was a fan, exclusively a fan for, sort of 80% of my life. And the past, 6-7 years, I've kind of taken a deeper dive and, really tried to kind of bridge, as you mentioned, sort of the aspects of fandom with being a more serious horse player. And then even, I've dabbled in ownership. I've done a little bit of all that. And so I think because there are all those various entry points that I mentioned, I think we just wanted to create a space where people can come in and, a very non-pretentious space, an inviting space, a fun atmosphere. And so we kind of modeled this thing in a lot of ways after Comic-Con. Obviously, it's called Equestricon, but we kind of went with that name and that sort of feel because we wanted it to be inviting. If you go to Comic-Con, it's not just all people who are interested in comics or any sort of, animated art or anything like that. I mean, it's a little bit of everything. It's a cross-section of society. And I think that's what we'd like to do ultimately, is create a space where a lot of people who maybe not as familiar with horse racing might dive in. But for now, as you mentioned, it's a great networking opportunity. It really is the biggest and best, in my opinion, based on what I saw last year and what we're expecting this year, networking opportunity for anybody who's in racing or who is trying to get their foot in the door, but additionally to learn and to sort of really expand your horizons as a racing fan and as a horse bettor. And so what we've done is we've created this program over 2 days, Monday and Tuesday of Breeders' Cup week. So that's October 29th and 30th. It's at the Kentucky International Convention Center, which is a brand new facility, beautiful state-of-the-art building. They just $207 million renovation. So the setting is perfect. The timing with it being Breeders' Cup week is perfect. And what will happen is on Monday and Tuesday, we'll have over 50 events, and included in those events are about half a dozen handicapping seminars, panels, workshops, opportunities to meet handicappers from all over the country and get one-on-one advice from them as well. Also an opportunity to pick up some books, including yours, Pete, and also Mike Maloney's book on handicapping. And again, just outside of those sort of formal set sessions that we have that are covering everything from tournament handicapping to visual handicapping to ticket construction and wagering specifically at Churchill Downs on Breeders' Cup week, to get these opportunities to get one-on-one hands-on advice from expert handicappers, people who have cashed for hundreds of thousands of dollars in tournaments or who are at the track every weekend making, significant wagers, and to be able to pick their brain. I mean, that's that's sort of an invaluable experience. And so that's really what we try to assemble. And that's just the handicapping side. We have so much going on that's related to ownership and to learning about aftercare, which is obviously a cause that we're super, super dedicated to. There are also opportunities to hear stories from Breeders' Cup winning jockeys and trainers. Massive program. So I would say go to equestricon.com, and that's EQUE Equestricon.EQUI. A lot of people spell it that way, but it's Equestricon with an E after the U. And you can check out the full schedule of events. Tickets start amazingly at just $10. And the full experience to go to all those panels that I just mentioned and sessions on handicapping is just $65 for 2 days. So we packed a lot into it, and we think it's a program that's worth experiencing.
Here are some of the ones I can't wait for. Pete, you're sometimes when my brother was just getting started as a DJ, they play these festivals with like a lot of different stages, and he always used to be concerned, and his management would be concerned who he was up against. Well, you're in big trouble because you're up against Tom Durkin at one point. So good luck with that.
Dan.
Yeah, you're up against Durkin. So good luck with that. I'm excited to watch. I don't know if I have one at this time, but on Monday there is a Relive the Inaugural Breeders' Cup with Tom Durkin. If I can sit and let Tom Durkin read the book to me before I'm good. So this has to be great. I'm excited about that one. The Kentucky's Greatest Race Calls panel is another one I'm excited about. Has Tom Durkin, Larry Colmus, Travis Stone, and Kurt Becker. I got to see them last year at Saratoga's first Equestricon, and that was a lot of fun, super fun, where Kurt Becker talked about the Spicer Cub call, and Travis obviously talked about his American Pharoah call, and that one was a ton of fun. Like I said, the up against Durkin, but still a good one, is the ticket construction that you're going to be doing, Pete, with Mike Maloney and Papo Morales, who's at, I believe, from Amwager. So a lot of good stories and ideas of that. And then the one that I'm really excited about is Marshall's another guy that I could listen to talk for hours, Marshall Graham, talking about the wagering models and what you need to know. I think it's going to be a really informative piece for a topic that seems to keep coming up in our game with how these computer wagering models are affecting odds and all of that stuff. So a lot of really cool things going on. I'm looking forward to checking them out.
I can't wait. One of them that I'm actually not technically involved in as a host or panelist, but I am involved in because it's just been announced that the World Horse Players Tour will be sponsoring the tournament panel that you're going to be on, JK. I believe that's on the Monday. I'll be in attendance. I'll be in attendance for that one for sure. I really can't wait. And tickets on sale now, Dan. Right? Give folks the best way to find more information and actually purchase tickets one more time.
Yeah, best way to do it is just go to Equestricon.com. Again, full schedule listed. You can see some of the, all the topics and the panels. I should also mention, and this is one of the biggest things happening on Monday is that, we talk about fans and horse players specifically feeling like, they're left out sometimes. And so Monday, what we're doing is we're actually hosting the Breeders' Cup post position draw at Equestricon. So again, giving people sort of unique access to an event like that, which is typically very much an insider event. It's open to everyone this year. There's sort of an inner circle that, sort of for the connections only, but outside of that inner circle, everyone's going to be able to witness the actual post position draw, which we're really excited about. That's Monday, late afternoon into the evening with a little bit of music and after party following it. And then Tuesday we have the Triple Crown winner, Justify, his ownership team, Mike Smith, Bob Baffert as well, will be out signing autographs to benefit the PTJF, and they'll bring out all the trophies from the Triple Crown run. So again, another sort of fun type of thing that everyone can get in on. There's so much more stuff like that. Just go to Equestricon.com. Again, like I said, tickets starting at just $10. You can get a lot of the stuff that I just mentioned for that $10 ticket. The panel, seminars, you want to take a deeper dive, it's a $65 ticket for 2 days. Really just an incredible value, and we're so excited for it. And so definitely head on to Equestricon.com, and all the information will be there waiting for you.
All right, Dan, before we let you go, we're a little over, but I'm going to keep you because I want to hear your Northern Dancer sob story.
Oh, my God. So the sob story was I literally had two horses in the race. I, like you, was very high on Mektal, but I also like Johnny Bear. I thought, given his experience over the turf and how well he'd done in the race last year, I was like, Johnny Bear is going to be a big price. So going into the day, it was in my mind to kind of really do sort of huge exactas with those two, and we built some trifectas around them. They'd done so poorly, and we hear this so many times, they'd done so poorly earlier in the day that I got gun shy. So instead of boxing my exactas, I did these huge exactas with Mektal on top and Johnny Bear and Hawkbill second, who I didn't even really like. But I was like, you know what? Like, if he comes in second and I don't get any money out of this, I'm going to feel stupid. So I end up investing all this money into that exacta and tries built that way. Luckily, I did a small saver try, wheeling those two with all in every position. So I got a couple of bucks back. But obviously, I'm not going to miss an opportunity to complain about not making more money off a 17-1 shot coming in with another horse that we both had pegged as being sort of, primed for a big race in Bechtal. I thought he did run a big race, just kind of flattened out a little bit late.
Yeah, it was not. We'll talk more specifically about it later. I was certainly disappointed. Thought he looked about 1-5 to get the job done. But you raise a good point. It is true that we often will complain after a race, oh, I should have bet more, I should have won more. But to take it to the next level and say, okay, now let's look at how I put my tickets together. What did I do wrong? How should I have done it better? I don't mind that kind of after timing when it's going to lead to making a better decision in the future and betting a more efficient ticket the next time. So it is a smart thing for horse players to be thinking about and try to build upon, kvetching aside. All right, Dan, we got to let you go and bring in our other guest, but thanks so much for your time today, and we'll be talking a lot more about Equestricon on the show, and we look forward to having you back on soon.
Thank you, guys. Happy anniversary, Pete. Enjoy it.
Thanks, my friend. Appreciate it very, very much. All right, JK, we're going to keep talking about Woodbine. We're going to bring in somebody else who was there. He is every time we have him on the show, people shout to the rooftops about how much they enjoy his work, and we love having him on too. He is the founder of publichandicapper.com and a brilliant Twitter follow at CarsoniPH. Scott Carson. Scott, how are you today?
I am thrilled to be here about to talk about a win rather than a $25,000 loss.
Fair point. Last time we had you on, we were deconstructing the remains of the Saratoga $50,000 challenge. This time, much happier ending at Woodbine, where you had the opportunity to put yourself in a great position, and you ended up winning. Is this your second seat to this year's National Horse Players Championship that you got from running in the top 5?
It is my second seat. I'm a little nervous about it because I don't want to split my tickets, so I think I might use the JK method of playing the same ticket all the way through to the final table.
I like it. It's a little, JK, I'll let you explain how you approach this, because it's an important lesson for people, not just for the NHC, but I think for when you play two tickets in general, whether it's on DRF tournaments in the World Championship of Handicapping or really any tournament. How do you give Scott some advice here?
I think often you end up zigging and zagging, and I think for a while, because of the 2 entries final table success, I felt like that was the best way to do it, to play the 2 entries and kind of zig and zag. And I did a hybrid of that where I did use that cap horse on both entries. I did use another 13-1 shot on both entries. And so that's why they both moved up that year that they did. But after playing a ton more contests since then, what I realized is that you kind of have to really commit yourself to playing more the same if you really want to take advantage of having those 2. Otherwise, late in the game, you end up with 1. And I just think that, especially with the way the NHC is, and last year not playing any turf races and optional races, which I did. I'm looking forward to possibly, I only have 1 now, but there's still some opportunity to get a second one. I'm looking forward to playing with 2, with being able to just, kind of go down with the ship or do well by kind of sticking to the game plan. And I just would prefer to do that. I just think that there's a lot of hoping that comes into play when you start splitting your tickets. And I want to play what I know or I think is going to happen. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. If it does work out, I'd love to go into day 3 in 42nd and 43rd place and have a real opportunity to then spread around and catch some numbers when the racing is very limited on that 3rd day. You don't have a lot to pick from. It's early cards. It's winter racing. So you get a bunch of 6-horse fields at Aqueduct and 6-horse fields at at Laurel, and I think you have a better opportunity of catching some prices there when you can spread when it's a lot more thin in terms of your options.
The contest on Saturday was another under 40 player, JK, getting the job done. James Metzger of Louisville. For a while there, it looked like it was going to finally be Tony Joe's day. Tony, at one point after the second stakes race, and we're going to go back and talk about the stakes racing in order, but I want to do a little more tourney talk first. But Tony had two entries, one at 19,000, one at 4,000, and it looked for all the world like it was going to be his day. Tony continued to stay aggressive, which a strategy that was borne out. But when James Metzger hit a big win bet, a $1,700 win bet in the Northern Dancer, his total went to 30,000. He gets the job done. Alan Schaefer second. Tony settles for third. He was certainly odds on to win at one point. What's going on with Tony in these big contests, JK? And Scott, I'll ask you the same question too. What happened here?
We covered it on the show, on the World Horse Players Tour. We talked about it. I think the fact that he's always in contention is a sign of his quality, a sign of how good of a player he is. The thing about Tony, what's going to happen at some point is he's going to win like 4 contests in a row. He's just going to have one of those runs. He's going to win the Breeders' Cup. He's going to be the second person, to win the Breeders' Cup betting challenge twice. He's that type of guy where, because he's willing to lose it, he's going to end up, kind of amassing a bunch of good victories. He just keeps kind of, being the bridesmaid for the moment. But it's not because of his quality. It's just because he's aggressive. When you push like you push, sometimes you end up running second, third, fourth, and fifth.
What do you think, Scott? What's your perspective when you sit down at a tournament and see Tony Joe is there? What goes on in your head?
Well, first of all, the legend of Tony Zoe is increasing exponentially. He didn't come in until the 7th race, where you had to start in the 7th race in order to meet all the minimums. So he comes in. Yeah, I didn't see him, but next thing you know, after the 7th race, he had like 2,600 on both his tickets, which they started at 2,000. And then he disappeared because he wasn't sitting in the room. And then he came back and was like, "Yeah, there's Tony." And then 19,000, holy cow, 19,000 on one, 4,000 on the other. So pretty amazing. I mean, he's scary. At the same time, he's like any other tournament player. He'll bet 15,000 on a horse that you're like, really? So he's human like everybody else, and he's got a computer program. He's betting overlays. And no doubt that sometimes they are overlays, and sometimes I'm on the same pick as him. Just because I'll ask him like, who do you? 3 seconds to post, I'll say, who do you have here, and we'll be on the same horse. So, I agree with Jonathan. He's already making a lot of noise. He's gonna make some huge noise. He's gonna be like the first guy to win 200,000 from the BCBC. But at the same time, it doesn't freak me out to have him in the contest because I know he's human just like the rest of us.
The legend of Tony Joe. That's maybe a future project for us. We could do like an animated series or something, JK. I like the sound of it. The Terminator, part man, part machine. And I was very impressed because I thought that the way that it turned out bore out his continuing to bet when he'd amassed that lead. Had he sat on his 19,001, or even if he'd combined his 2 entries, even if he'd turned the 19 and 4 through clever betting into something like 23, James Metzger was still going to blow past him. I think he played it perfectly. I think he's been incredibly unlucky late in these tournaments, and I'll just third the emotion that you two put forth, that it's just a matter of time for him. Want to give a little more props to James Metzger. Bold bet. I wrote an article about it. Definitely worth checking out. Somebody who really used looks handicapping and the ability to go down to the paddock and look at horses as the key to his success, caused him to increase his confidence on Oscar Performance, who we'll get to in a minute, and put him off his initial pick of Patterson Cross and on to Johnny Bear, as did the overlaid price in his estimation on Johnny Bear. Gets the job done. And I had a great moment of humility with James because I just assumed as a 30, I would never assume this of the average horse player, but when I meet a horse player who's 35, at this point, I assume that they know the podcast and have some clue who I am, JK. No clue who I was. I'm like talking to you with this familiarity, and it's kind of like, who are you again? It's like, oh yeah, I got to check the ego at the door sometimes. But it seemed like a great guy and somebody who I think also could have quite a future making bold bets like that. Did you get a chance to meet the winner, Scott? What were your impressions?
I did not, because he sort of was there when the prize was announced, and then he disappeared. So maybe he had to catch a plane or something. So I never heard of him. I didn't know anything about him. But when I read your article just a little while ago, and,
at least somebody reads me. That makes me feel good.
and and I knew about that from Twitter. So so you can follow the steps there. There was a quote there that he had to bet half his bankroll. He basically elevated that bet due to the overlay, because he thought, for some reason he thought Johnny Bear was going to be a lower price than his morning line, which I was sure he was going to be higher. But when the horse went off into that overlay country, he modified his bet. He bumped it up. And that's the way you got to do it. So he, I don't know much about him, but just the fact that he did that in the strategy means he knows what he's doing.
That's right. Tony actually sat with him and was also very impressed. But I think that's a great point, Scott. Some people would see, oh, wait a second, the horse is a longer price than I thought. Maybe there's something that I'm not seeing. Maybe I should bet less because I'll win the same. No, the right thing is you're confident the horse is an overlay. You bet more when the horse is a longer price. Isn't that right, JK?
Yeah, for sure. Unfortunately, and it's probably something that I'm glad we're talking about it. I probably need to adjust a little bit, but I've become so pick oriented and I rely on being able to run things together to get to those higher totals that I sometimes don't always find myself in live money contests, like really leaning on a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 to 1 shot. I'll use, but I don't like lean on them. And so I don't usually have those conversations with myself. I might look at a combination and say, oh, that double is an overlay, but not so much in the sense of like one race.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about, something we will pursue as time goes on. But for right now, I want to talk about the specifics of these races. Let's start with the Woodbine Mile. I mean, have you ever seen a Grade 1 mile race run so slow early, Scott?
No, and I think Craig Milkowski was questioning the actual timing of that race. I think he might have had it like 0.4 of a second slower, which would still make it about 24 for the mile. For the first quarter. And so, yeah, it was extraordinarily slow. But, I mean, a lot of people sitting around me were interested in the filly, who they thought was going to take the lead. And once that filly scratched, they were like, now what am I going to do? And the answer was Oscar Performance. I didn't pick him. So, of course, this is redboarding. But he figured to have the lead. He's always been fast. And the only real blemish on his record was his last race in the Arlington Million, I guess. Yep. Where he just, he caught a course he didn't like, and he just, and that was it. Usually I like to bet a horse like that, but because the horses were relatively evenly matched, I was digging for a price, and I was on Haberkamp and Divisadero. Between the two of them, I thought one of those two was going to do it.
Well, Mr. Haberkamp is a horse I wanted to mention because I thought it's just so interesting. We talk about the jockey's dilemma all the time. We talk about going slow where you invite closers into the race. Now, Oscar Performance, legit Grade 1 horse. you give him that pace setup, he's got the finish, he's going to take advantage of it. But I just thought it was a really notable and interesting difference between the De Silva ride, where he sort of recognized what was going on, gave himself at least a chance to win by being close to that pace, and then you contrast that, and I don't like to knock jockeys, but you look at the Jamie Spencer ride on Lord Glitters, who wasn't invited into the race because he was as far back off of Oscar Performance lengths-wise as you would have expected him to be if they were going fast, and just gave the horse absolutely no chance to win, in my estimation. And Lord Glitters, for me, definitely one to take out of this race off that mediocre looking on paper finish. But I have a feeling if you go in and look at how fast that horse came home, he'd be one I'd want out of the race much before I'd want Oscar Performance. What did you think? What do you think of that idea, JK? And what did you think of the race in general?
I was torn a little bit. I kind of fell for it. And look, I know I have a contract, but I really did think that Divisadero hadn't really run any bad races this year. And I did think that they would go a little bit quicker than they went. I didn't think Oscar Performance would be loose like that.
Even after the scraps, thought they'd go fast.
I just still thought that in that like you talk about, in that kind of that one turn mile, that they would just kind of, Oscar Performance was going to try to get that position moving forward. That other horses were, how other horses were going to, and jockeys were going to think, let's keep it, let's stay close. We don't want Oscar Performance to get loose. And those are the ones that end up being sort of honest. And I thought Divisadero and Lord Glitters both had a live opportunity. This is also a handicapping point we talk about a lot, where I will forgive a horse for one bad performance, but not really two. And I think that's where Oscar Performance kind of falls. He had that huge race in the poker, and then he kind of had that bad race. So if you could forgive that one and expect that he would run the race he ran in the poker, you could easily find the performance that we saw on Saturday. I tell you, my biggest thing that I'm going to take from this race is, I don't think it's going to happen necessarily, and maybe it will, but I really, really hope that Oscar Performance goes in the turf and not in the mile. And I would love to bet him in the turf at 15 or 20 to 1. People are going to see that awful running line in the million and all these other situations, and going from one turn.
Stay, yep.
Oh, and can you? I mean, if he runs these fractions in the mile, in the turf, he'd be tough at 15 or 20 to 1, because he's a quality type. He's running good figures. Yeah. So I don't know if that'll happen, but I sure would like to see him in the turf.
I don't disagree. When I was talking about him, like I wanted to bet against him, it was thinking at a mile, in the Breeders' Cup mile, against the likes of Lord Glitters. How about you, Scott? Any of these horses you're looking forward to betting on or against the next time they appear?
Well, it's interesting. I watched the replay this morning, and it's interesting that race, every horse basically behind Oscar Performance, they didn't make up any ground. I mean, they didn't. I think only one horse passed one other, and it was like to try as hard as they could. They just could not. They couldn't make up ground. I don't know how fast they went. I think they went pretty fast at the end, but they just, nothing happened. So I would say, from my perspective, yeah, I'd be highly interested in the two horses that I bet, Mr. Haverkamp and Divisadero. I do think that Divisadero is in career form, but and I don't know if it was the pace or if he just had an off race, because he ran two really strong races his last two, and I think that some people might write him off after this race. The next one could be the one.
And let's not forget where the next one could take place. It could take place on a turf course in which he's never lost.
Yeah. I mean,
Excuse me. I'm sorry. He got beaten that last, but it's where he's won 3 times. Yeah, he got beat in that Wise Day, and I forgot about the Wise Day. But he's won 3 times there in Graded Stakes race on Derby Day.
Yes. It's an interesting idea. His form's going to look pretty darn dirty, and he does have that similar pace excuse. As far as the figure makers, came back pretty strong, 104 on Bayer, have to imagine when they go that slow early that these figures have some element of projection in them to be as fast as they are. 124 raw on time form, 128 adjusted, which comes back even higher than the Beyer. Fractions, of course, coded blue throughout. Be interesting to see what happens with this group of horses. Let's move it forward, Scott. And one of the specific, obviously, it's always great to have you on, but specifically I wanted to have you on because I know that you had these other two long shots that came in on the day. You mentioned having horses in common with Tony Joe. Starship Jubilee is one of those. This is the one that closed out his double to get him to 19,000 on the day. I heard you whooping and hollering too, so I assume you had the horse. This race, a little bit different. Fractions come back coded red to both the quarter and the half. Ends up as a pretty square 123 on the time form scale. Scott, what did you like about this winner, and what did you think about the performance?
Well, going into the race, I announced to anybody within shouting distance that I was going to hammer Starship Jubilee. And I put that in my public handicapper analysis. In fact, I bought a second entry just because I thought I was going to put so much money into Starship Jubilee, and just in case I was wrong, I needed a backup. She, if you looked at her numbers, she's run twice. She's run fast enough to have won this race. One was last year when she was third at 7-1. And then there was another race at Gulfstream where she ran both times. I think it was a 94 Beyer. And she earned sheet numbers there. I use the sheets as well. And she earned sheet numbers there that were equal to New Money Honey and even a little bit better than Inflexibility. And she was circling back to her top number. And if you look at the Beyers, you can see that she went from, like an 84 to an 86. So it looked like she could possibly run her top, her best Beyer at 94. And she also had monster workouts. Now, she is the type of horse that always has pretty good workouts. But if you looked at them over the course of the year, she looked like she was feeling her oats. I mean, she looked like she was going to run the best race of her life. And that's what I look for in any contest and in many bets, is a horse that's about to run the best race of its life. She was no doubt in my mind going to do that. And she was just about as fast as the two Chads. So, I did pound her on the win end. I had, I bet less than I should have because I had been losing all day, but I bet 200 to win on her. And I bet a double into Yorkton. But as a safety, I also had $100 active with each Chad over her because, sometimes they ruin your day, and I didn't want them to ruin my day. And then I also had, just in case I had like a real fat triple with the two Chads on top. Now a lot of people hit on that race. There were only 6 horses in the race. So, it wasn't like she was a master secret find. But she was 11-1, so it was. I had an opinion, and this time it worked out. It was great.
Ran right through that top on the Beyer scale, all the way up to a 104, and I think it was an impressive find. This was a horse, and this happens too often at Saratoga. It happened where horses will hit the wire, and I will just text JK, how the heck did that win? And often I will replace heck with a more colorful word. And this was a case for me. I just slept on it. And it's very valuable to me anyway, Scott, to hear you talking about that and to think about, things to look for in the future, especially horses who do have those back races, cycling back towards them and using the improved workouts as a clue. Now, did you just see those workouts listed at the bottom of your daily racing form, or did you have some sort of clocker information? How did you make that assessment about the works?
Well, the first thing I do with any card, or if it's just a few races, I'll do it with any race. I set my formulator to show merged workouts. And not only merged workouts, but all workouts, not just the traditional setting, which is, mostly workouts since its last race. So I look at I look at the lifetime works, and if it's a 9-year-old, it takes a while to look at them all. So I will look at I look to see if a horse has, and I do this before I do anything else. I look to see if the horse has improved works since, not only since its last race, but also just lifetime. Because sometimes a horse, the light will go on, and like they've only worked in 49 all their lives, and then for some reason they just ran a 47.4 bullet. And it's not that hard to find, but I think most handicappers just don't always look at that. And I'd say 9 out of 10 probably don't look at it. Some people know workouts here and there; they look at the bottom. I found that regimenting, and I can't do this the NHC because it's just too time. But regimenting it sort of alerts me to horses that may be ready to improve. And like after the race, you're like, oh yeah, there was a bullet workout. I should have seen that. Well, I make sure that I regiment it so that I never miss with those kinds of improvements.
Good stuff. JK, your thoughts on the Northern Dancer before we very quickly move on to the next race?
No, kudos. I couldn't have found the horse. I can see it now after Scott's explanation. But just to be clear, the part that threw me off was the Dance Smartly. I just thought was like really bad. And that was the one that kind of screwed me up. And that was the one that kind of would have prevented me from finding the horse without Scott's explanation of kind of what direction she was going in. So I was an inflexibility guy during the race.
Yeah, was that 2 races ago, June 18th?
Yeah, the one where Santa Monica beat her. She was on the lead.
Yeah. I chalk that up to just a bad effort, just a clunker for whatever reason. And if you look at the running line, I didn't watch the race, but if you look at the running line, it does say that there was a bump at the start. And when I have enough time, I look at all of those just to see if it was just a bump, or was it like a sandwich? Was it like a pinball? Because I didn't look at that one because it was just such a terrible race. I didn't worry about it. But often there's a clue in the running line. You don't realize how bad it was.
That is a good point. That bump start to me is one of the most could go so many. Could mean absolutely nothing, or could be worth 3 lengths. Head-on replays, especially HD head-on replays, a great way to make assessments about that. Mike Maloney talks about that in Betting with an Edge, the book that Dan mentioned earlier that I was happy to be the co-writer on. I wasn't planning on talking too much about the Bold Venture, but I do know, Scott, that you had the winner, so I just wanted to hear, just going to make you redboard a little bit about Yorkton and how you came up with this one. And did Pink Lloyd's breaking through the gate have anything to do with the bet here, or were you going to bet the same thing regardless of if the 3-5 favorite broke through the gate and suddenly was even money?
Well, I bet 400 to win on Yorkton, and that's all I was going to bet. And I was just like, it's either him or nothing. And I bet it before the break through the gate. Now, once Pink Lloyd broke through the gate, I was feeling great about my pick. I then went up and did like another $100 worth of exactas with every horse, but with other horses besides Pink Lloyd. So, yeah, this is another horse that had a monster work. He had spacing. He had lost to Pink Lloyd in his previous race by 2 lengths when they were both carrying 124, and on this day he was carrying 7 pounds less than Pink Lloyd, and Pink Lloyd had run like 2 other times since that race. Now Pink Lloyd is always fast, but with that kind of weight. And he had also lost 2 races before at the distance. Trouble at the gate, but that can happen anytime. But he lost at 1-10. So I knew A, that he had some vulnerability, but B, that he was going to be incredibly overbet, and that was going to inflate the price on the other horses. And then the final is that Yorkton looked like he was working gangbusters. He had just lost by a little bit, and it was complete bonus when Pink Lloyd broke through the gate, and people will if he hadn't broken through the gate, Yorkton was still going to win that race. I mean, I have no doubt that he still was going to win that race, but we'll never know.
Let's move on. I want to talk. We'll go 5. We'll try to keep this to 5 minutes over if you guys can handle that. It's 12:01 now. There's some other racing on the weekend I at least want to discuss quickly, but we should talk about this Northern Dancer. I was very disappointed with Mechtal. I thought everything looked perfect, and I was pretty certain I was going to win halfway through the stretch. But no, Johnny Bear gets it done for the second year in a row. Was he on your ticket, Scott?
Yeah, I picked Johnny Bear on Public Handicapper. I think it was my best week ever on Public Handicapper. I had three out of 4. Johnny Bear looked like he was as fast as any other horse in the race. If you look at the buyers, there were a couple others that have higher ones. But 2 races before, he ran against Mechtal and lost by a neck. So Mechtal goes off at 2-1, and yes. Johnny Bear goes off at 17-1, 16-1, and then not only had Johnny Bear lost, but only by a little. In his next race, he had this really bad trip where he was stuck on the inside and he was bothered in the stretch. And even though there was only a 6-horse field, he basically just lost all chances. So I thought he would be an overlay. Now, I was betting him more as an overlay possibility than like, this is the bet of my day. So I only bet $100 to win on him, but I hit, I also did some exacta boxes and tries. If he had gotten third, I still would have collected, I think. It turned out to be like a $5,000 race for me.
Very nice. JK, what were your thoughts on the Northern Dancer?
Yeah, I was part of the Mechtal recovery group. I thought he was going to run really well. The race where he was chasing Tiz a slam last time, I just thought it kind of set up for him second off, blah blah blah. The rider upgrade, I think to Jose off of Alan Garcia. No offense, but who's Alan? There's Jose. And I just thought he was going to be a better situation, but I was wrong about that one as well.
My gut is to be against those horses coming back, especially if they come back in the International against a serious European challenge. The figure came back at 98. I saw no excuse for Mechtal. I just don't think he's as progressive as I thought he was. He's a horse I followed over there for a long time, and I've just never been able to connect, and I think the contract has expired. Scott, you had something else to add?
Yeah, I just want to say, just to make my pick look not as good, Johnny Bear got an absolute dream trip. He had, as opposed to his previous race in a small field, in this race he had no trouble. They went a solid pace up front, and then he darted to the inside at the head of the stretch and just had a complete opening. I didn't know if he was going to get up there. He just barely got up by half length. So he overlay, perfect trip. Then it's still a smart bet. But at the same time, I don't think I would want him in his next race.
Scott Carson with the perfect example we've talked about on this show about handicapping and horse player etiquette. When you're right and you have 2 losers that you're on the phone with, you just kind of act like you got lucky, and it takes the sting away from them. It really is the right thing to do. Thank you, Scott.
Oh, you're welcome.
I do feel a little better, but you got to take advantage of those situations like you did when they're there. And by being objective about it, it's going to make you more likely to cash a bet the next time. Did you stick around for Sunday, Scott? Did you see the Natalma in the summer?
Yes, I did. I did see those races.
Any thoughts on a filly or colt in there who you might want going forward? La Pelosa gets it done in the Natalma, 3-1 with a 79 buyer speed figure. Loads of credit, by the way, to Dan's colleague, Penelope Miller, who loved La Pelosa, took some video in the morning, was showing that around, telling everybody who'd listen how well she was doing, gets that job done. And then Chad Brown and Fog of War get it done in the summer at even money, earning a slower figure than La Pelosa did with a 77. But anybody, I'm just curious if there's anybody you wanted to throw a spotlight on, Scott, going forward, or you, JK.
Well, I think the Lady Pelosi, is that the Is that the name?
La Pelosa, I thought it was, but
La Pelosa. Okay, yeah. So I don't have the names up in front of me, but I thought she looked great. In handicapping, I did not bet the race because it was crazy. I mean, it was a really tough race. But from the 13 hole, I wasn't going to bet that horse, and I think she was 5-2. But she her previous form looked great, and she really ran really well. So if she's running on the BC Juvenile Fillies turf, I'd have a hard time going against her.
Did you get a chance to check it out, JK? I didn't tell you we were going to be talking about this race, so no worries if you did not. I was just curious.
No, I didn't. I know I saw that the two War Fronts ran 1-2 in the boys version, but no, I didn't handicap or play that day.
Gotcha. No worries at all. We'll be talking much more about those races as we go forward. Before we leave, let's talk for a minute, and JK, you'll lead the discussion on this, about the 2-year-old racing at Churchill from the weekend. Serengeti Empress getting it done in the Pocahontas with a 78 Beyer speed figure. What did you think of that run, and what did you think of the Iroquois?
With Serengeti Empress, I was obviously paying attention because a friend of mine was interested in trying to buy Serengeti Empress, and the amount of money that I heard that was turned down for her to be sold had my attention. So I wanted to see, and she didn't disappoint, making the current owners look like geniuses for not selling her. She ran really well, and she won by a Rachel Alexandra-esque margin over at Churchill Downs. It was the first thing that popped in my head when I saw that she had won by like 19 and a half. So super impressive, and looking forward to seeing her run again. But I also think there's an opportunity to, with a big win like that, she's going to be bet heavily back on that racetrack for the Juvenile Fillies, and definitely probably an opportunity to play against her, but not because she's not good, just because the narrative is going to be driven way too far into the ground.
Coated red throughout on time form, comes back as a 105 that's upgraded off the raw 98. That is an impressive race for sure. Oh, we should give credit to our man Sean Tugel, who gave out a nice pod winner earlier on the card, JK, the Rudy Brissett first time starter. Were you part of that one?
Okay, I'll tell a story. This was supposed to be a split division with the second race on the card. I believe it was a split 2-year-old race. No, maybe it was the first race. The first race on the card was a split decision, a split thing. Floron was not going to get off of bold proposition and was going to have to. A weird situation with Preamble. So I go down to the little makeshift sports book that they had at the hotel I was staying at in Mexico. I bet on bold proposition, was disgusted when he ran third, went to the pool, a pina colada or two later, and I got a text that Preamble won, and I forgot to go back and bet.
I love it. Very quickly, Cairo Cat wins the Iroquois Beyer a Beyer of 80 and a time form of 99 raw, downgraded to a 97 for the performance rating. Scott, I'm assuming you were too busy dealing with Woodbine to pay much attention to these Churchill races, or were you able to watch, and do you have any thoughts to share?
I was walking throughout the plant trying to get 9,000 Canadian exchanged into U.S. dollars. So I really barely bet on Sunday, and I went to the bank, and the casino they wouldn't do it. It was pretty tough. So I didn't really get an opportunity to watch any other race. I do, looking at the chart, Cairo Cat really looks great in there, and Serengeti Empress, that's a horse I'm probably going to want to try to beat in her next race.
For the same reasons JK said, or do you have something else?
Yeah, that, and also just, you win by 19 lengths. I mean, it's probably a monster effort, so I'm going to, want to play the horse to react. Either that or, Breeders' Cup betting challenge, $600 to show. We'll see how the numbers turn out.
All right, I like it. We'll talking about this stuff. JK, quickly.
Yeah, shout out Travis Stone, the voice of the DRF Players podcast.
I was about to do the same thing, but I'll let you do it.
Okay.
Funny.
No, I'll let you do it because I'll probably mispronounce it. If there's a mispronunciation for a made-up word.
Exactly. I don't think you can mispronounce a name that doesn't exist. But I was going to say the same thing. Churchill on Sunday. Props to Travis Stone, who, of course, does our intro, and we thank him as often as we can for that. But a great call with Kofefe, who was a 9-length winner at Churchill. What was it, JK? Kofefe trumps the competition or something like that?
Very, very good. I was very happy to hear Travis did get that one, and very fun.
I wonder when they're 2 to 5 if it gives you a little extra incentive to work on the exact phrasing of your clever calls when they're that likely a winner. But hilarious stuff from Travis, who of course does a great job. He'll be appearing at Equestricon with us in just a few weeks' time. Scott, are you going to be making it down to Equestricon?
I am actually going to be at Equestricon on the same panel as Jonathan.
The tournament panel sponsored by the World Horse Players Tour?
Yes, indeed. Mythical versus live bankroll handicapping contests. And I look forward to it. I'm going in now. I get to fly in on Sunday night and just soak in the Breeders' Cup vibe for the whole week. And I look forward to seeing some of the other panels at Equestricon.
Awesome. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you, Scott Carson. Thanks also to Dan Tordjman, JK, of course, as always, Travis, we mentioned before, Willie Nile, who does the theme song, more of his music at willienile.com, producers Craig and AJ. Most of all, thanks to all of you for listening. We will be back on Friday, and I mean it this time. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale. May you win all your photos.